The audio situation is so fucking sketchy. I literally just started talking with mute on. This is just all. It's just a fucking catastrophe. We're live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, variations thereof. Welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. Today, especially casual for a huge number of reasons, mostly because it's all a fucking mess. Casual, not professional. My name is Rotten Deadite. With me today are.
Oh, is that me?
Sure.
Hold on. I don't have the thing up. Okay. No, that's James first. James, go.
I am
Casual.
James, also known as Yes.
And I'm Andrew, also known as the White Guar.
Today we're talking about Argonians, which we don't really know anything about. I understand one of us finished
damn it, we will try.
I understand one of us. Well, I mean, let's face it. We constantly talk about things we don't know anything about. But I understand one of us finished the Murkmire quest.
Yes. I did finish the main quest of Murkmire.
Thank God somebody did it.
I've been taking notes and screenshots through this whole enlightening journey that we've taken through Murkmire.
Pillaging
What's that?
the Imperial bot.
You're cutting out real bad, bud.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Your internet is awful today.
Okay. Yes, it is.
So. Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where we should start. I think it's a good bet to say that up until... Okay, so the only thing I'm really qualified to talk about with the Argonian Lorecast is the Argonian creation myth, which we got for the first time in ESO's Murkmire.
Yes.
And up until that point, up until I first read this thing, I was under the assumption or the illusion or the misapprehension or the headcanon that Argonians were, I don't remember who said it, as close as you can get to aliens in the Elder Scrolls universe. Every time we're not sure about something, let's take a shot. I'll be obliterated in seconds. That's not a good idea. So I was under the assumption that Argonians were as close as you can get to aliens in the Elder Scrolls universe. I thought that was a really cool idea. I liked the idea that the Argonians were neither elves nor mare, or were neither men nor mare, which I thought was a really cool concept. It didn't really go very far to explain what the hell was going on in the east. In Akavir, because they've got all manner of God only knows what swimming around over there. But on the whole, I just thought it was really cool that it was the idea that Argonians were not embroiled in the metaphysical war between men and mare. I thought that was a neat idea. And then the Elder Scrolls Online writing team wrote an Argonian creation myth, which was, and I'm trying to be kind here, a rehash of the Anu Padme monomyth. And that didn't really make any sense. So apparently now Argonians are either men or mare. The monomyth doesn't really let you know. And we still didn't get any answers about what the hist are in the monomyth, or why the hist is important, or why it talks to Argonians, or really anything useful, actually. In my opinion, I think actually the Argonian creation myth in Murkmire is not good. I think whoever wrote it was, less cool and therefore wrong. Exactly. I think it was, I don't think it's dull. I think it's a good, I don't think it's boring and therefore wrong. I mean, it's a good rehash of the monomyth. But I still think that it's a rehash of the monomyth. It doesn't teach us anything about Argonians that matches up with what we already know. And it's sort of just, it's just sort of a retelling of the monomyth. That's really all it is. And there's nothing in it that really matches it to the Argonian culture that we're familiar with now. And the Argonian culture was, I mean, and this might be being a little unfair, but, in my opinion, the Argonian culture is largely, hey, hist, woo! Yeah. They lick trees, woo! I mean, there hasn't been a whole hell of a lot up until Murkmire. Well, actually, up until ESO, there hasn't really been a whole hell of a lot of development in the Argonian culture until ESO came out. And ESO from launch had very interesting stuff to teach us about Argonians. Not the least of which was the fact that they build mud huts, which I think is badass. and how they've kind of, they don't really have a centralized representation in any leadership. So I don't know. Andrew, you've played Murkmire. What interesting things have you learned?
So what I did find was we learned a lot about the tribal structure of Argonians. Specifically, as we get closer towards the center of Argonia, tribal structure. I mean, it changes from tribe to tribe, but for the most part, each tribe is dominated by their home hist tree. And so they've got this sort of situation where they've got a tree minder, someone who basically interprets the will of the hist, and every hist has a method it uses to communicate with its tree minder. For example, the Brightthroat tribe, who is the main tribe that we work with throughout the main quest, their tree communicates via wind chimes. And so you need certain chimes for certain situations, and depending on how the winds blow those chimes, that changes how the tree minder interprets what's being said. And it implies that there's a supernatural aspect to it, that some Argonians are better at receiving these this information from the hist, and others aren't. Some might be naturally inclined to it, so they don't really have a choice in the matter. It's, oh, I can hear it, so you hear it or you can't. I know. I think, if I recall, I think the wind chimes is the only one that I'm familiar with, that I recall from the quest. I know the Deadwater tribe had another one, but I don't remember if it went into detail. So we've got the tree minder. We've also got the egg tenders. So I'm not sure what the frequency is, but there are clutches of eggs that are spawned, so many times in a year, and the egg tenders basically watch these eggs, and they make sure they're healthy, and they basically sit in little nests that are steeped in hist sap, which I thought was kind of interesting. But we also find through one of the quests that as eggs are sickly, maybe they don't have enough luster to their shells, or thin membrane is one that's mentioned in dialogue. Actually, I can pull up the dialogue here and quote it verbatim. Let's see if I can find her here. Let's see. It's tree minder Mime.
Mime.
Let's say. Oh, here we go. There are signs to look for: dry shells, lacking luster, thin membrane, and empty shadow. I'm confused by that one.
Ooh, yeah, that's got portents.
Yeah. Inevitably, they sink into the roots and fade away. Those that remain are always healthy members of the tribe. And so the hist is somehow aware of the health of these eggs. And in this quest in particular, the hist tells the tree minder Pavu of the Brightthroats, that a bunch of the eggs are sick and they're suffering, and one of the egg tenders just aren't listening to that. And so that gets into the meat of the quest. Let's see, what else about the hierarchical structure? Other than that, I mean, that's basically it. You got the tree minder, the hist, the tree minder, and the egg tenders. Everyone else just kind of seems to do their own thing. They have this belief that everything is the way it should be because the hist wills it. If something happens, if something changes, all right, so be it. That's the way the hist wants it. And though some hist are better at understanding the hist than others, no one has perfect insight to what the hist wants.
Mm-hmm.
There is one tribe, though, that's worth noting. They're the Ghost People tribe. I don't...
From the possibly...
What's that, James?
He's moving in and out.
Make it a bit sensitive. Is it connected? Because I know that...
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Try to type it in chat if you can. James. Now,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I'll respond to it if I can. There's one tribe that the Vishkalil tribe, the Ghost People tribe, and they have this proclivity that they cannot procreate in and of themselves.
Really? Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, well, wait a minute. So this is kind of establishing that the Argonians are capable of procreating outside of eggs and...
Yes, I will talk about that. They have a whole ritual they do that's similar to a wedding.
Anything to do with it.
Yeah,
we're gonna get little pieces of James every once in a while here.
Statement and questions.
So I'm actually really glad that they started addressing that they started bringing in a little bit of that they started suggesting that the Argonians can reproduce outside of. Oh, is his sap anything to do with how the tree speakers and the hist communicate? It affects a lot of their biology.
Not that I saw. I mean, they haven't really talked a whole lot about his sap at all, as far as I mean, there was one point where they have this sort of vision quest thing that, and each tribe has a different way of doing it. For the Deadwater tribe, they burn a specific flower, and then in another one they get like a deep sap or something, and that's
deep sap.
And then and so it was something like that because the roots of the hist go, they're so widespread that you can find sap pretty much anywhere.
Okay.
And so you partake of both of these sort of peace pipe sort of things. You combine the techniques of two tribes, and it throws you into this kind of enlightened state where you're high as tits, but you start seeing things that happened in the past, and the hist is communicating with you, and it's giving you some kind of insight. And I won't spoil what that is, but yeah, I mean, that's really the only. I mean, the hist sap is kind of there, but there's not really any reference to. We don't learn anything new about the sap. Let me put it that way. So speaking of procreating, though, I mentioned the bonding ritual. There's a whole quest about the bonding rituals, and most tribes, the bonding rituals between two sex allele, and it's the equivalent of an Argonian marriage. And so, and it's not necessarily out of love or out of, whatever. It's one guy you talk to, he says, well, I chose my mate because I thought that our hatchlings would be quite becoming. That's the only reason. And that's, he wanted his kids to be attractive. And so, okay, that's fine. But so they're yeah.
That's a little interesting because the earlier stuff, or at least or it might just be me buying into some kind of imperial propaganda, is that you get the Argonians and procreate by some kind of calling that Argonia at once and just emerge into this orgy of breeding and everything else. But that's impractical.
Yeah, the bright throats do that. They actually invite people from every tribe. They're the only tribe to do this. They invite people from every tribe, even people who aren't Argonians. Oddly enough, Ogel, that's what they call them. People who are it's like
smoothskins.
Yeah, it's like Enwa, except
Outlanders. Yeah.
And so they invite people, and at this one time of the year, they have this huge bonding ceremony, and it's literally just a big orgy.
Yeah.
So they approach it tactfully. They don't say an orgy.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's a very tasteful orgy. It's very it's a very Yeah.
So the idea is that this particular orgy, it strengthens bonds between the tribes, specifically the Bright Throats and whatever other tribes are present. Almost like in feudal Europe, you'd have marriages for political reasons. That's also what this is.
Orgies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so the resulting offspring, the eggs that result from the orgying, are part of the bright throat tribe. So the bright throats are literally a sort of a fondue pot of different bloodlines of Argonians, if that's a thing. The thing is, they imply that the hist is what determines the the physical features and even the tribe that they belong to. So because it happens with the bright throats, the hist takes all those eggs, turns those into bright throat eggs, and they hatch as bright throats. So if someone from the dead water shows up, partakes in the orgy, has an egg, and then leaves, well, that egg is now part of the bright throats, whether or not that dead water was whatever.
Yeah. Did they get this is a very, very specific fit what you were saying, but then you get into some bizarre political machinations of if someone lays an egg as a result of the orgy, but it's left bright throat. Is it work? I don't know. It could just be something that again will depend on the tribe, which I think is how Bethesda is getting out of a lot of stuff with Murkmire. They're painting an awful lot of it as this is just how this tribe does things. It could be different somewhere else.
Which
I think is also a thing with the monomyth as well. Just to flag.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. Because actually it's an interesting almost hypocrisy or mirroring of what happens with the ghost people tribe. I mentioned how they can't procreate. So what they do instead is they go and they steal eggs from other tribes and they raise them in their tribe. So the hist takes those eggs.
Yep.
Now they're ghost people. And I guess they're all like pale, so they all have white scales and they live in the dark. And they only venture out at night to take these eggs. But they're this almost fabled kind of tribe that no one wants to mess with, like they're scary.
So I assume can I just interrupt?
Sure.
I'm assuming therefore that the whole Argonians licking hist sap, is that just did they sort of just decide that's the way it works for some tribes but not all Argonians? Is that?
It's not clear. I mean, I would imagine based on what I've seen, because there's a spot where you're investigating what's going on with these eggs in the bright throat village, and all the eggs they're sitting in like wicker nests or whatever the nests are made of, and those nests sit in pools of hist sap. And if you look at the eggs, they have big holes in them. So Todd in the Dream Sleeve group, he mentioned how the holes are literally there to get sap directly into
the egg.
And that's again counter to what we had before, but I don't think that they've really decided what hist sap does. Because when we've had it previously, it's been Argonian hatches, and then they lick sap from the bowl of a hist tree is roughly the wording, and the more that they lick it, the more human-like they become. But then go to the strange case of Jarit, who grew up never having any hist sap,
right?
And he just couldn't read social cues very well, which to me makes me think, is it just socialization? Is it just something like that rather than the sap itself? If
I recall correctly, it was originally intended to explain why the Argonians in Morrowind had the reversed knees, the beast skeletons, whereas the ones in Oblivion didn't.
Yeah.
So little hand wavy, I guess, but.
There are a couple Argonians that you meet that There are a few Argonians that you meet that aren't native to Black Marsh, and they don't really talk about hist sap and all that. But I need to figure out this thing because you can hear everything that's going on here.
That's fine. We can't hear it very loud. Okay. So then I'm just going to assume that there may be a little bit of like sort of gamey-wamey hand waving happening here.
Maybe. I mean, the only thing they really reference in these Argonians they are also Ogel. They have a specific word for them. I think it's Lukiel.
Okay.
I'll put it in chat here. Lukiel. And so a Lukiel is an Argonian that wasn't born in the Black Marsh. You meet a mercenary, and then you meet an Argonian named Cassandra. And neither of them were born of the hist, and so they have no real connection to the hist. At least Cassandra doesn't. She talks about, and she's kind of touchy on the subject. She doesn't hear the hist. She talks about how she's sat under the boughs in the shadow of the hist, and she just hears silence. And the mercenary you talk to, he says, yeah, after a while of, well, what does he say? He says, after so long of not talking to the hist, and that's just life. You come back and you start to miss the silence. So it implies that he regains his connection to the hist. Which was interesting.
So it's not something that has to happen at birth then. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, well, and there was a piece. There was a piece of writing that Jonathan Burnson wrote that has some underlying connotations regarding ideology as skin and racial memory and procreation. And he actually entered it into the Imperial Library's fanfiction contest. I voted for it. But his implication is that water, being memory, is passed on by the womb. And so that's why racial phylogeny is like, oh, well, it takes on the form of the mother because it's taking on the ideology of the mother through memory. So it's taking on that racial memory. So that may be what the Argonians are doing. If they're born away from the hist, then they still have that racial ideology as Argonians.
Right.
And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend heading to the Imperial Library and checking out that piece because it's really great. It's structured like a scientific paper, but it's all like eugenics and stuff because the speaker is a Thalmor.
There you go.
Yeah. So, but it's a really, really interesting read, and that's the underlying point.
So can we then assume that there's a connection between hist sap and memory?
I think so. I mean, if I heard somewhere, there's some saying in Tamriel that all rivers flow through the Black Marsh.
Right.
Yeah. And the implication there, water being memory, trees drink water. That's a thing, right?
Yep.
Well, hist are trees. So the hist, if we put that all together, the hist are absorbing memory for some reason.
Right.
And so if they are altering that memory and producing that as sap, then I mean maybe I'm stretching it here, but I mean there's some kind of history or some kind of memory thing going on there.
History. I got a history. It's funny.
Well, something
He's a
else
historian.
Well, something I noticed on that topic, thinking of water as memory. So water is memory and stone is history. And that's something that the Yokudans have used.
Yeah.
And if we combine the two, we end up with ice, which is truth. It's the combining of memory and history. That's where we get Stalrim from.
Okay.
And so, so if you're armored in Stalrim, you're literally armored in truth. but so stone is history. And something I noticed, I picked up on this pretty quick, was that the Argonians don't seem to be terribly interested in their own history. And that's as you go through the Cyrodiilic collections quests, the Argonians don't seem to care about the Zanmirs, the big Mayan temple looking things. They don't care about what's inside them. They don't care to learn about their history. And at one point, a character says outright, what does he say? He says, "No good thing comes from stone."
Ooh.
And it's like an offhanded comment that he says. You're not even talking to him. He just kind of says it as you're walking. And I think it's as you're approaching a Zanmir. He says, "No good thing comes from stone." And I thought, okay, so is that the idea that all that Argonians have about their history? That nothing good comes from your history?
Well, I think Lauren Schick actually said outright at one point or another in an interview that Argonians don't really care a whole bunch about their culture.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So and I mean, if we pair that with their reverence for Sithis, which is change, and so they accept change as it happens, and that's okay. That's the way that things are.
Yeah. There is actually a text that talks directly about that.
Okay.
It's called Kuvaste, the needed change. The word Kuvaste translates to the catalyst of needed change.
I see that here.
Which hang on.
Where's that word from?
Though such a direct translation in no way does justice to its original meaning. Another translation could be that which creates the needed pathway for change to occur, or even the spark which ignites the flame, which must. They see change as a constant, a thing which has to, and it's a.
Is Kuva a word from something? Because I've just wanted to point out that Kuva in Warframe is a catalyst.
I don't know.
Ooh.
I think it might be a little bit of a real world reference there, I think.
Yeah, okay.
I looked up Kuva first one.
I kind of took that and control.
You're cutting that real hard.
Yeah, you went real robot there, man.
Tell Megatron I said hi.
Yeah.
Man.
Wow. That's synthesizer level right there, man.
Directly with
the Dream Sleep just ate everything he said.
Sorry. Racing chain it happens. And in whatever circumstance, they see change as an inherently good thing, which is a direct contradiction to how the it's just the.
Oh, he's paralleling the Psijics and the idea of Sithis. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the PSJJJ or whatever it is.
Oh, the promise of the Sige. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why they don't like stone, because stone is permanent, stone is unchanging.
Yeah.
But I kind of had, and it's also, if you look at the Yokudan myths, they use
memory stones. Yep.
So, and if I remember rightly, when Felix was talking in the Redguard cast, he was saying that maybe there was something or other to do with stones in how the Yokudans were understanding their world and what stone meant for them.
Mm-hmm.
So are we associating stones with a previous Kalpa, maybe? I don't know. I'm reaching a little because my memory don't quite go. But I thought that was another interest stretch it. And in my opinion, the Argonian sounds very like the Redguard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And also, I've got myself thinking about Kalpic cycles again. And the idea, because a lot of people were, when Skyrim came out, a lot of people had a hard time wrapping their heads around the idea of Alduin eating the world. And the official responses that we got from it were about it were things like, well, maybe he doesn't, maybe he doesn't. You know, it was very sort of like, whatever you think is cooler, go with that. But it just occurred to me that if stone is permanence in history, maybe this has some kind of a reference that we can make to the Kalpic cycle vis-a-vis what happens to Nirn when the cycle kicks in. Maybe what's being consumed is not the world, or not all of the world. Maybe not the Earth. Maybe the core of the world. I don't know.
I've actually got something for you on that one.
Oh, okay.
So spoilers incoming. If you don't want to hear what happens at the towards the end of the Murkmire main quest, I suggest you bugger off.
Good. This means I don't have to play it now.
So throughout the main quest, you're working with the Cyrodiilic Collections agency or something.
Yep.
Specifically, you're hunting for the Remnant of Argon, is what it's called, and there are lots of hints about what it is, but it's really vague. And so Famia Mercius, who is your main go-to contact for Cyrodiilic Collections, she actually says, while some of the songs end with an unworthy snake swallowing the remnant and turning into a hideous giant that ravages the land for 100 seasons.
Ooh.
What does that sound like?
Yeah.
That's not
really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can pull up, because there is a part of one of the 7 fights of Aldudaga that talks about Alduin taking like a Karstag form.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to link it to the Aldudaga a bit more generally, actually. If you're talking about stuff being left over from a previous Kalpa, the Aldudaga and the Greedy Man and the Leaper Demon King hiding bits is all what the early parts of that are about. So if we're thinking about stone as a previous Kalpa thing and the Argonians not liking that, then yeah, I don't know. It's just another reference that popped into my head.
Yeah. So I picked up on that reference to the 7 fights, and specifically the part here, and the third, who is Alduin, who looked akin to a Karstag man, gigantic, had adorned in storm cloud and endless yellow tooth. He was Alduin the World Eater, and he only said ho ha ho. And so he was giant. He turned into a giant. And so when you actually find the Remnant of Argon, you learn through this vision quest that the Eye of Argon is like a giant sphere of amber, which contains all the souls of a dead tribe of Argonians.
Okay.
They were
hence the Eye of Argonia. Right. Okay.
Yeah, they were protected by the Hist. Their souls are held in stasis inside this lump of sap. You get to go inside of it, and you have to make a choice. And one of your companions dies in the process because they choose to. And you create a new tribe from the ashes of the old. So there's more change there. But if we think of this sphere of amber and we equate that to Nirn, the souls that are inside are in stasis. So what does that mean for the people of Nirn in the Kalpic cycle? Because because Famia Mercius has compared it to Alduin already, an unworthy snake swallows the remnant. So I'm curious to see what you might pull out of that.
Well, my first knee-jerk reaction is that there's a lot of parallels to draw between the snake who is Alduin or the snake who is Lorcan. There's a lot of I mean, in a basic Ptolemaic sort of way, there's a very destructive instinct that we're both sort of keying up to. But there's also it's also important to remember that while a lot of cultures on Nirn, I'm sorry, just a moment. A lot of cultures on Nirn parallel the snake with Lorcan. They also just generally refer to the they also use the snake to represent a more general sense of evil. And then some cultures don't do that at all. I believe the Yokuda have more of sort of a regenerative relationship with the snake as a symbol.
Yeah, the world skins and all
Yeah.
that. I mean, they imply that the hunger of Sep is
more closer to
all
Lorcan.
consuming. It's more like he's got a flaw,
Right.
and that's his flaw, and he sheds his world skin, and here we are. Yeah, so it's less evil and more snakes as a symbol of cycle.
Having said that, I don't think that viewing Lorcan as the creator of Mundus, or as the trickster, or as evil, or anything like that's a very sort of Altmer approach to the the creation myth in general. If you look at all my training is in Dunmer mythology, so it seems like that's the only variation between Altmer and Dunmer in vis-a-vis this particular area is whether or not they think Lorcan was a bad guy or a good guy. Or actually, it's arguable that the Dunmer don't really see any difference at all. It's just the Dunmer are more sort of like, well, life sucks, get a fucking helmet, and the Altmer are, life sucks, make it end. So there's not really it definitely sounds like the snake motif in this particular legend is playing to a force of a malevolent force of some kind, or certainly a regenerative, a destructive or regenerative force. But yeah, Orkay was also a snake at some point. So I don't think that. Although I should say I don't think this is Orkay we're talking about now. This sounds more like the sort of like galactic level, serpent. So I don't. But I think what this is doing is it's doing a very good job of explaining one of the basic. It's using, or it's representing the more basic and primal influences that create the Altmer vision of reality, which is the idea of a greedy or needful change, which can be construed as evil or selfish, imposing itself on a stasis or a structure which is either unmoving or safe or perfect or whatever you want to call it, and those two forces, when those two forces collide, you get stuff that happens, and that's why you've got this amber mythology here, the Eye of Argonia. Yeah. Which, I mean, I don't know if that was what the Eye of Argonia was going to be when Kirkbride and Kuhlman were planning on it, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, they call it the Remnant of Argon. And so whether that is the Eye of Argonia or if it's something different.
I'm kind of curious if they don't Argonian soul or general terms, because you have the idea of the hist being what's gone before and what will come after. Come to Saul's terrible words, possibly awkward, but if you're thinking of the Argonians as something that will come back from the hist, why was this particular tribe held apart from that? Why were they stopped from returning?
It had actually because of aliens. That's why.
Hey!
Aliens were showing up and stealing the souls of these Argonians. And
cool.
And so to save their soul, because the soul has to be recycled by the hist. That's what we learned, which is why that ghost people tribe is so reviled, because when they steal eggs, they are stealing other souls that are then added to their tribe, which then have their own cycle within that hist, which means other hist lose souls. So actually, I just realized that the Hist are trading in lunar currency.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, that's
which is kind of interesting given how the Hist have previously been portrayed. You get some people who talk about them as a hive mind.
yeah.
This kind of thing states that they're clearly not.
Yeah, it does, doesn't
And,
it? Well, I think maybe each
go.
individual. I think each individual Hist is its own hive mind, if that makes sense, and the Argonians
Right.
are kind of party to that. Whether they have any kind of direct influence, because some Argonians are better at interpreting the will of the Hist, or can hear the Hist, better than others. But
yes. But you have.
Yeah. I leave in.
I didn't know you
I said that.
Oh, I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
You had your phone off. I said it.
Because you have you have each Hist kind of providing its sap to the Argonians, which will then come and bring more Argonians and more water with it, because of the way that organic matter is made, into the Hist and constantly cycling through. They are, in partaking of the Hist's sap, they're taking, as we said, they're taking on the memories of that particular Hist. They're taking on that particular Hist.
Yeah, so it's almost like each Hist is a world in itself.
Yeah.
Right, and it's. I'm wondering if each Hist is emulating the Dream Sleeve,
or it's leeching from. I would absolutely say they're stealing from.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about
whatever they can for themselves.
Yeah, gathering up memory and things, but because the Hist and its tribe. So the tribe, if we consider the tribe as a simulacrum of Mundus, right? Someone dies, their soul is recycled through the Dream Sleeve, while here the soul is recycled through the Hist. So the Hist is serving as like a microcosm of the Dream Sleeve itself.
Yeah, or
which is interesting.
Or a kind of just trying to rebuild their own world, if you like. Because if you remember the Anuad, the Hist are one of the two sets of things that come from the 12 worlds.
Yeah.
And so they've got their own circuit that's entirely distinct from the cycle of Mundus that is the Dream Sleeve anyway. So they're just trying to build that up and keep that going. It almost feels like an arrhythmia in a heart, if I can put it that way, because you've got a small bit of a heart that's beating at a slightly different pace to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But
beat of its own drum.
Oh, no, yeah. Thoughts that can be had there, but that's the kind of image that I had of them. The Hist are trying to be their own thing, but quite what the Hist are to the Argonians as well is another thing that I wanted to vaguely think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I also thought it was very odd in general that the Hist don't show up in the creation myth.
No.
Considering how central they are to the functioning of Argonian society, they don't show up in the creation myth. And I was wondering if that was because ESO is sort of implying that the Hist are a natural thing on Nirn and that the Argonians have sort of co-opted it into their culture. Because I was under the impression that, again, going with my Argonians are aliens theory, the Hist arrived on Nirn remotely and brought and spawned the Argonians as a result. That's sort of the idea I always had in my head.
Yeah, one of those original 12 worlds of creation, the remainder of it became Black Marsh. Is if we read the Anuad literally, that's what it says. And so I mean, and I think that's where the whole aliens thing comes from. Which, whether or not Argonians themselves are aliens, the Hist definitely are.
Yeah.
They're so far removed from anything approaching normalcy in Tamriel. Thinking of the dichotomy between.
Oh, so maybe that's what ESO was suggesting here, that the Hist and the Argonians are inseparable, and that the Hist are the equivalent of of visitors from the outer realm or whatever, or an adjacent realm or whatever you want to call it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Argonians have to have a creation. So the Argonian creation myth is their description of the way the world was born. But that. Okay, I see what's going on here. All right, this actually works very well. Yes. All right. So the Argonian creation myth is not the creation myth of their world; it's the creation myth of the world they're currently in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not their origin.
Does that make it better? Do you think?
It does if that's what they were thinking. If that's what they were thinking, then it's actually very clever.
Because I mean, any information about that original one of the 12 worlds, that would have to come directly from the Hist. They would be the only ones who remember that. And I mean, when looking at the Argonians, I mean, the Argonians strike me as something similar to maybe the animunculi of the Dwemer. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The animunculi are not the Dwemer. They were created by the Dwemer.
Right.
And they shall remain when the Dwemer are gone.
And it makes sense, therefore, that because the Argonians were created by the Hist, they're not technically people and therefore work out well as slaves.
Yeah, which I mean, one of the stances I take on Argonians is the Hist literally use them as slaves.
Yeah, because they're property. Argonians are property. We all know this.
And I mean, that doesn't necessarily, I mean, that doesn't make the Dwemer right.
Yes, it does.
Per se, but that they are inherently slaves by their nature.
What? Right. Who was talking about this? The Argonians are slaves to the Hist.
It's probably me.
Yeah.
Oh, was it you? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And I really kind of like that idea. It's a very hands-off, laissez-faire kind of slavery. But
because I mean, if the Hist showed up, like, hey, we don't have arms, we're trees, so let's. There's this lizard. Hey, lick this. You're a people now.
Lick this.
Go do what I tell you to do. And so I mean that's kind of my thought on what the Argonians are.
Yeah.
Just in their very being. And not to mean that in any kind of derogatory sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
But that is their function with the Hist. They are the eyes, hands, ears, and feet of the Hist. They operate on their behalf.
Slaves is the wrong word. Servants, maybe. Not even that. No, it's
I took it as an ecosystem.
Yes.
If you're talking about black marsh as an organism that functions,
right.
Argonians are part of black marsh, and they form part of that function in the same way. Which I saw something, I can't remember exactly where, that made me think that what constitutes an Argonian was somehow related to just a thing that lives in black marsh. So, and a thing that's created for and by the Hist, which I'm sure I remember hearing somewhere that MK had some very odd playthrough of Morrowind, where he was decided to be a Nord who was an Argonian,
right?
And went and stood in the slave pens and realized there weren't any proper Argonians there after 3 hours, and so gave up. It's the idea of Argonians are things that are acting in accordance with the will of the Hist. They are not these lizardy things that have legs and arms and whatever. It's just they are a part.
Yeah, Khajiit Tim's got it. It's I assume that's your name. It's a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. It's which was the word I was trying to drag out of my head, and it just wouldn't happen. Not slaves at all. But it's a really good it's a really good explanation of again, I think, why Argonians work really well as if you consider them not as men or mare, but as a third option, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, people throw around the word Betmer, but I don't like that word. really, because it implies that, I mean, and usually people throw like Khajiit in there too, but I think Argonians are in a league of their own. I mean, that's just kind of the way I see it. I was going to bring something else up about the Argonians. Oh, maybe we could talk about physiology of the Argonians.
Yeah. Apparently Argonians can mate outside of the hist, which explains why Argonians have boobs.
Maybe. I always thought that was because the hist were trying to make Argonians in a way that's more able to be assimilated into other cultures. And so, these creatures have tits. Let's give ours tits, and maybe they'll be accepted.
Yeah, maybe.
Something like that. I mean, yeah. But specifically, I think it was in the Pocket Guide to the Empire 3rd edition. It mentions how Argonian genders are called life phases, which implies that Argonians can change their gender.
Right.
And
or do.
Yes, I met one such Argonian named Chalmot. Let's see. He says he's talking about a little pendant he gave to his mate. He says, yes, I carved this many seasons ago. I hoped it would convince my beloved Kudnikal to join me for our tribe's next bonding ritual, but I lost the totem before it could be presented. Of course, this was when I was still a female.
There it is.
The dialogue option is, you used to be female? He says, where? I know I hit that. I asked about the bond. I might have had to go back and...
Yeah, there is a text that talks about that as well. It's called a grand transformation. It's saying that they don't know whether it's the hist's will that they change or their own, but it's a specific ritual within this particular tribe's culture that they will shed an older dead one. It's again part of the life stages, as you say. But
yeah, I must not have capped it. But the response, he says something like, "Yes, I went through the changing some 6 months ago. Fortunately, my beloved has undergone the changing as well. So he used to be female. His mate used to be a male, and they flipped. And then it gives us some more information about the bonding rituals that I mentioned earlier." Many dry skins compare it to a wedding. This is not entirely accurate, of course. While there is always respect between a bonded pair, romantic feelings are not strictly necessary. Each tribe has their own traditions with their commonalities. A tree minder performs the ceremony before the hist. The bonded pair are blessed with good health and vibrant fertility, and then commences the bonding, as it were.
The wink, wink, I erect the spine of embarrassment, bonding.
We ask him, how does one choose a partner? He says, this varies. Sometimes the decision is based on an emotional connection, other times merely a physical attraction. Some tribes even use such ceremonies to strengthen their political connections. Take the Bright Throats, for example.
Yeah.
You'll sound a lot like a marriage.
And then I asked him, well, why did you pick your mate? And he's like, well, I thought we would make very becoming children.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so they run the whole gamut of everything
of orgies. Yeah.
But what you were saying there in terms of he was talking about his mate and how they both flipped, and this is a good thing. That's a little weird if they're to think that change is a good thing, because we changed, but we both changed, and now things can stay the same, and this is good.
Yeah.
Which is.
Yeah, I mean,
it makes me think about the state of Black Marsh as a whole. They're all about change and Sithis and instability, maybe more than change. But there's nothing that really resembles. The word that springs to mind is progress, but I don't really want to. With the connotations there's no change from one state to another, to a third, to a fourth.
Progression
and so
is
on.
what you mean.
Just,
yeah.
Better.
Not progressive, but progression, right?
Yeah. There is no progression of change. There's just flux.
Yeah.
Which is a little weird.
Well, and very Elder Scrollsy, if you think about it. Very Patamaic. Change without going anywhere. Just spinning your wheels. And also, that's partially due to the fact that it's an MMO and you know budgets.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, unless the change is happening below the surface, which is something that I'm sure I remember seeing on, possibly on our Tesla, in that the Hist has roots and potentially has roots everywhere, to draw up memory from everywhere. And had this magnificent image of the Hist roots clashing with Sophocil's cogs.
Getting all tied up and jammed in there,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Jamming all the cogs, fighting for who gets to control Nirn, and that side of things. Maybe the Hist almost don't need just need Black Marsh to sustain until they can do whatever they're doing elsewhere or else how. Until they can affect a further change somewhere else.
Yeah.
What drives the Argonians to betray the Hist, like the ones in the Blackwood Company? That's I mean, as much as the Argonians have this really close relationship with the Hist, it's not mind control.
Yeah.
And some Argonians have already mentioned that they, if they were brought up away from the Hist or aren't exposed to the Hist, then they don't feel the Hist at all.
Yeah, well, then it's a particular Hist.
Right, true.
There's no reason that one Argonian can't turn on a Hist that isn't theirs, right? I mean, they probably wouldn't, for morality and culture reasons, but that's not their Hist. Yeah. So why? Why they hold no particular allegiance to that Hist over there. This is their Hist. But on the relationship between the Hist and the Argonians, I wanted to point out. I remember what it was I was going to say. I wanted to point out during the Oblivion Crisis, when the Hist sent Argonians in to invade the Deadlands, which is the most metal thing outside of raising Aldscar from the dead in Aldrun. That's I mean the Dremora were fleeing the Argonians and their onslaught, and so that tells me that the Hist can assume control over their drones,
right?
As it were. I kind of think about was that in Mass Effect, where there's that hive mind race that you fight, and they just kind of randomly all turn on you at the same time. That's kind of what I imagine for the Argonians. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, assuming direct control.
Okay. Yeah. And so the Hist do that to the Argonians. So it's just, whoop, I'm taking control of you now. And that's how they formed their army that invaded the Deadlands and closed Oblivion Gates. And I mean, I imagine that the Hist look at the Argonians as expendable too. I mean, even though, so long as they have access to that soul, they can bring the soul back as many times as they want.
Yeah,
that's
so long as they're water.
It's practically necromancy, but not quite. But I mean, that's pretty much my spiel on the Argonians. I mean, is there anything else that I can try and expand upon?
I mean, I'm very satisfied with that. I only had a couple of answers, a couple of quibbles, and I'm very satisfied with the way things have gone. Again, I mean, we've mentioned this before in previous casts, but we don't really feel, on the whole, as qualified to talk about Argonians as some people we know.
Yeah.
So we were pretty sure this was going to be a little sketch,
Yeah. I think we did okay.
Yeah, I'd say, well, we did better than I thought we would. Or you did better than I thought I would. How about that? So yeah, that's pretty good. I think we should definitely cut this short before we start wildly speculating about things and making a fool out of ourselves.
Fair enough.
Which is very possible. I think the next cast we do is definitely going to end up being Dunmer, because that's the only thing left on the list.
Yeah.
Yep.
Of
the playable
Yeah, I don't know how we're gonna manage to do that quickly. Anyway, it'll be a whole cast of me ranting. That's basically it, of just me, rambling about stuff. So I want to thank everybody for showing up. I'll throw this up on YouTube as soon as conceivably possible because I have a relatively free afternoon, so that'll be nice.
Awesome.
So I'm gonna wait for Andrew to get back so we can all wave.
Sorry.
No problem. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in hopefully 2 weeks.
Hopefully.
We'll see. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.